Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Mark from Solar Games. This past weekend, I was playing Magic at a game store in San Francisco called Heretic Games. So, this store they have Magic, of course, but they also are pretty well known for their Warhammer, playing area. The store had in the back a really large space, actually, really nice, clean, well organized store. In the back area, there were 4 tables and really just set up for Warhammer wargaming. And while we were there, we saw like 2 players playing some Warhammer already. I think one player was teaching another. But during the whole tournament that day, playing Magic, there were many players that came in to play Warhammer, purchase Warhammer products, etc. So this store is really well known for Warhammer, and that's really awesome. So as one of the players was leaving the store, I kind of stopped him and asked him, "Hey, what army are you running?" He told me he was running Blood Angels and how he was explain to me the new strategy, and you could see the excitement on his face about Warhammer and all this stuff. And that really got me started thinking about why Warhammer 40k commander decks were so successful. In fact, this set was so successful that Wizard basically talks about it, touts it all the time. If we could say what was the most impactful thing or meaningful thing in 2022, I would say it's Warhammer 40k decks. I think some people will say Double Masters 2022, but man, it's not the first Double Master. I probably would say Double Master in 2000. 2020 was the most impactful, set. And of course, 2021 has got to be Commander Legends. Again, it's not about those today. We're going to talk about Warhammer. Sorry. So, why was the Warhammer Commander deck so successful? It's really interesting, right? Because if you think about it, on the surface, let's look at it from a Magic perspective. On the surface, the cards are great, they're useful, they're powerful cards, pretty, good price for the decks as well. They're not like $1,000, right? They're not even $100 each. They're reasonably priced. Now they're a little bit more expensive. I would say maybe almost double your normal standard commander decks, but in some ways, kind of worth it because again, the commander decks are good, especially when you buy the set of all 4. The product release was well managed, right? So they had the products on the shelf, but they didn't overprint the product, partially probably because Wizards didn't actually know it was going to be so popular. Now, you can see the effort they put into, right? Normal commander decks, you'd be lucky if you have, 5, 10, 15 new cards. Warhammer 40k decks each deck had around 40 new cards, so totaling over 160 new cards added to Magic. Other things, right? They put a lot of effort into the cards. Every single card in the deck, including the basic lands, has special, unique artwork that's for the factions, for Warhammer, etc. In fact, because to introduce this deck, they had to, of course, reprint certain things like Soul Rings and Arcane Signets and things like that, Command Towers. But all of them were unique. There were 4 different Soul Rings, and each one represented one of the factions. Just all the effort, the little attention to detail that they put into the product. It hits for every person. Someone who knows Warhammer is going to look at it and say, "Oh wow, that's a chaos symbol on the Soul Ring. That's great." And somebody who doesn't understand Warhammer can at least appreciate how the color scheme and the deck kind of puts together. Again, this we're only talking about aesthetics right now. And then, beyond that, when you start playing the decks, when you start playing the cards, they feel powerful, they feel meaningful. You never really feel behind. The cards are synergistics, and it's great. And if you really know the lore of Warhammer, you can start seeing, Necrons, for example, have the Catan, as part of their playable creatures, right? And they're reanimating everyone's artifact. Totally makes sense because again, this the Necrons, for the people who don't know, they, in order to have immortality, they kind of enslave themselves into these metal armor. And then they didn't really know they got basically enslaved. So anyways, that's what happened. That's why they're in metal shells and they can't really escape. But over time, they kind of freed themselves. So it's kind of nice. Okay, so that's just about the cards and the pricing, all those pieces. And But really, we've had cards, we've had unique cards, we had, Magic has its own story, IP, and those kind of things. And of course, the artwork's always fresh, different, etc. we had Baldur's Gate commander decks, which, again, draws in from a different IP, has different unique art. So what really about Warhammer, hit it home for everyone? Of course, number one is, I think beyond all the cards, beyond all the value of the decks, the story was great. I mean, Warhammer is a very well established IP. And Warhammer has a really strong lore behind it. In fact, I'm one of those people who love Warhammer lore, have never played the game, have painted maybe like half a miniature because, again, my roommate back in Connecticut, and he used to paint a lot of Warhammer. I was just kind of like, oh, curious, kind of help him out a little bit, right? That kind of stuff. But really, it's not something I played. It's not something I collected. It's just not something like, that I was really that interested. Of course, I started looking into the lore later and really got excited, really got kind of absorbed in it, actually. A lot of times when I'm sorting cards, I would just put on like Warhammer lore in the background, just listen. It's really great. If you haven't ever checked it out, give it a listen. It's as good as any like amazing sci-fi novel. So that's number one. Number two is, did I mention the lore is strong, deep, and fleshed out? Okay. In all seriousness, though, the thing about lore that's really great about Warhammer is that it takes the characters seriously. It takes characters have permanent death. The things they do have meaning. The things that they do is like valuable, and it is remembered into the future. And here's the thing: Warhammer is 40,000 years in the future, right? It's like, super high tech, advanced stuff. And you can imagine like humans are colonizing the galaxy. So the humans are everywhere. And even in that particular like moment in time, there was uniqueness to characters, to your heroes, to the people who represent certain factions or certain legions of like the Astartes, which are the Space Marines that are very iconic for Warhammer. And just every character feels really fleshed out. They have a background story. There's also mysteries. And this is one of the things I think Warhammer does super well. I mean, the thing has been around for longer than Magic. And there are still mysteries that were set from day one that have not been explained yet, right? So as an example, if you ever look into it, Warhammer has legions. So there are legions of, Space Marines and whatnot, right? But the really, really fun stuff is that there's 20 legions and there's 2 legions we don't talk about. They're just kind of like expunged. And this is not like, oh, hey, they were around, they died. We don't talk about them. Now, originally, I think these legions, like a lot of players, the assumption is that they built these legions so you can craft your own legions, kind of like a white space. So you, the player of the game, can build your own, like army that fits that role. And you can imagine who they are or what they are. And it's kind of up to you how you build that army. So think of it as the custom character slots, right? But also building that custom character slot, they put a lot of effort into making them unique. The story is mysterious. They drop little hints over the years. I mean, sometimes you have to wait years for a new book where they just give you a 3-line, 4-liner about one legion. And it's like, people were still asking the question, like, who are they? What are they? Why were they expunged from history? Remember, so what happened was the storyline goes, they did something so terrible that the emperor had to basically expunge all records of them from all known history and probably like had to kill people to like make them forget, right? And only certain people, the Primarchs, remember this, but most of the Primarchs are dead or corrupted, so they're not talking about this stuff anymore. Really interesting, right? And there's some theories about what happened. I'll just give you one that's really cool. So the legion that's like really well known in Space Marine is Legion 13, the Ultramarines. They're well known because if you look at any like Warhammer, you're going to notice the blue colorations, with the Ultramar U, so upside down Omega symbol. That's the Ultramarines, the blue legion, and they're Legion number 13, right? The expunged legions are 2 and funny enough, 11. So first of all, 2, 11 seems like the same, right? If you hold them in your hand. The other fun thing about 2 and 11 is that if you add them together, they add up to 13. And there was a thing that happened. I won't get into the full story, but basically something happened then suddenly the Ultramarines, the Legion 13, got a lot bigger. There's just like more people joined for some reason. Suddenly their legion was bigger. The assumption was that the Primarchs of those legions did something wrong, so they got like expunged, and all the troops that were underneath them kind of became part of like the Ultramarines. That's the story. Again, just kind of like fun stuff. But that's the beautiful thing. Like the world seems so old. It has mysteries, unanswered questions. You don't know if there's impending doom all the time. Like the impending doom is the Tyranids. So Tyranids were like kind of like came in to they were discovered a little bit later, right? So humans have expanded really, really far into the galaxy, but they're not everywhere. And so what happens is the Tyranids are kind of like entrenching on like the edge of their territories, right? Not just humans, but Eldar and other races. And the Tyranids basically are like this. They're like the Borg. I mean, this race exists in every fantasy or sci-fi fantasy type of thing, right? They're the Borg. They're the Zerg, essentially, from StarCraft as well. Basically, their idea is like they will consume everybody. They don't really want to ally with anything. They will not, work with you. It's all about just killing you, exterminating you, and bringing. And the best part about Tyranids, they want to bring you into one of them. So they essentially go to worlds, they fight the worlds, they kill everybody, they melt down all the bio resources, and then refuse them back into more Tyranids. Pretty fun. And they don't even have like spaceships. They travel in these like large, gigantic creatures, basically. So that carries them all across the galaxy and just goes crazy. So that's the thing. Like, it's a strong IP, it's a strong story, and I think part of what happens is that as players play with these, decks, and they play with other people like myself who can explain more about like Warhammer or just tell people about it, right? That gets them excited, and that gets them to go play. Want to buy the decks, play with the cards, etc. And that's the thing. I think this is one of the things where the story of Magic can suffer from not having one cohesive story like Warhammer, where we have many planes, and it's really great for Magic because different planes allows you to have different mechanics, and I think in a lot of ways for the game it works really well. But one of the challenges with having so many planes, having so many different differences in Magic universe, multiverse, essentially, is that you kind of separate the story. The story feels really fragmented. There's not like central characters you care about. I mean, there's of course like Teferi, who travels everywhere. Your standard cast of like your Weatherlight crew, they're going to be everywhere. However, it just feels more like fragmented because every plane has their own like uniqueness. They have their own races, the people, what they care about, what their problems are, etc. And every set Magic has to kind of shift planes because, people were kind of tired of the last region. So this is where Magic in some ways is a little bit weaker compared to Warhammer. But that's the thing. Like, I think at the core, if you build a product that has good storyline, good history, is well taken care of, it's well respected. Again, Magic didn't come in here, do a collaboration with Warhammer and just wreck the whole story of Warhammer. They really spent a lot of time thinking about what makes Warhammer Warhammer, what makes Magic Magic, and figure out where are the intersections of that Venn diagram where they can come together and build a great card that feels Warhammer but also feels Magic, right? And then not even taking any sort of pauses on the artwork. They really went out there and said, hey, what are the artworks of Warhammer? How can we incorporate that into Magic? And these little attention to detail, these little pieces that they put into they didn't have to make unique, basic lands. They did, though. They didn't have to, but they did. These little things that they put in really does matter long term, and it makes just the story, the whole playing, the feel, the idea, the essence of this game a lot more meaningful. And I think for players who play with these decks, they have this more cohesiveness. They just feel like the decks feel more right, and that's why the decks were better, and that's why the decks were just more meaningful. So anyways, that's my take on Warhammer decks. If you have not tried it, I highly recommend you try it. Even if you're not a fan of Warhammer lore, give it a shot. The decks are good. Most, the cards are valuable. They're gonna find place in other decks as well. Even if you don't like the Warhammer decks, you're gonna be able to have some very powerful cards that you can use in other commander decks as well. So, yeah, that's my take. And this is Solar Games. Peace.